Hello. June has ended, so it's time to do a monthly wrap up. So these are all the books that I read in June. Let's just get started. Actually, wait, the first book is a book that I read in May. I didn't do a wrap up for May because I only read 5 books and 4 of those books were for a video, so it seemed like a stupid idea to do a wrap up. But I do want to talk about the one book that I read that wasn't for a video. And that book is Cell by Stephen King. This book has a very silly premise. Essentially, at the beginning of the book, for some reason, everyone who is on their cell phone turns into a zombie. Like, just out of nowhere, they become incredibly violent. They just act crazy. I gave this book 2 stars. I thought it was alright. Like I said, I thought the premise that, like, cell phones turn everyone into a zombie was pretty silly. And at times, I also just found the book to be quite boring. There's also, like, a scene in here where there's, like, one of the main characters is a 15-year-old girl, and the main character who's, like, POV you're reading from is, like, a man in his 40s or something like that. And at one point, he, like, pictures her naked, which I hated. I hated that a lot. So I got some bad vibes from this book overall. But it was entertaining when it was entertaining, I guess. I don't know. I don't think I'd recommend it, to be honest. Now we can get into the books I read in June. The first book I read in June is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This book I was so excited to read. Essentially, you're following our main character, Irina, who is a photographer that takes pictures of boys in very, like, compromising positions. We're talking, like, taking a picture of a guy masturbating or, like, fully naked with, like, an animal mask on, like, stuff like that. And people seem to have very strong thoughts on this book, so I think I'm in the minority here because my overall thought is, like, yeah, I liked it. Like, I like a deranged female main character. I love photography. I love horror. So actually, now that I'm saying all this, I think I should have liked it more, actually. I did really enjoy, like, the female manipulator vibe and the social commentary, but outside of that, I just felt a little bit lacking. I'm just, like, overall left feeling like it could have been more of something, but I do still think it's worth a read. I'm excited to see what Eliza Clark comes up with in the future. After that, I read Respread by Ian Reid. This is a psychological thriller about aging and memory. It follows our main character, who's an elderly woman, and at the beginning of the book, she is placed in, like, a nursing home type thing, but it's like a weird nursing home. There's only, like, 5 people there. It takes place in the woods in, like, a nice little house, stuff like that. And though things go well at the beginning and she is, like, happy to be there at first, suddenly she becomes to distrust the people that are there, and there's just this growing sense of unease that something sinister is happening at the nursing home. I gave this book 3 stars. I liked that we didn't get any answers, and I think that Reid did a really good job of portraying the mental state as someone who has dementia, but also as someone who has a loved one suffering from dementia. I kind of just was sad the whole book. Instead of really, like, being gripped by it, I was just thinking of my own grandmother and how, like, upsetting things must be for her. So that kind of ruined my enjoyment of it, but that's no fault of the author at all. That's just a me thing. But yeah, I gave this 3 stars. And I think I forgot to say what I gave Boy Parts. I gave that 3 stars as well. After that, I read 8 Bridgerton books for a video that is coming out this month. I'm not going to tell you my ratings or my thoughts, but I will give you a quick little summary of each book. The first book is The Duke and I. All of these books are by Julia Quinn. The Duke and I follows the eldest female Bridgerton, which is Daphne. She's been on the marriage market for, like, 2 years now and doesn't really have any prospects. And then Duke Simon comes into the picture. Simon had a terrible relationship with his father and, like, vowed that he would never have children so that his father's title would die with him. And he's being accosted by all these mamas who desperately want their daughter to marry him. So he comes up with a plan with Daphne where they will pretend that they are, like, desperately in love and want to get married so that the mamas will leave Simon alone and Daphne will hopefully appear more valuable or desiring to other guys. Then I read the second book, The Vicon Who Loved Me. This book follows Anthony Bridgerton, who is the eldest, and he's decided at the first book that he wants to go on the marriage mart, but he desperately does not want to fall in love because he witnessed his dad die at the age of, like, 38, and he's convinced he's also going to die at that age. So he doesn't want to fall in love with anyone because he doesn't want to fall in love, just, like, die and, like, leave her alone. So at the very beginning of the book, he asks his brothers who's the most eligible lady that season, and they tell him, what is her name? I can't find her name on the Goodreads description. They tell him it's this one girl, but the issue that Anthony has is that this girl's sister, Kate, desperately hates him and thinks he's a rake. The third book is An Offer from a Gentleman. This book is kind of like a Cinderella story. This is Benedict Story in the Bridgerton universe, and it follows a young girl named Sophie who is the bastard daughter of an earl or something like that. All these titles just get me confused, to be honest. But then he marries again, and her nasty stepmother hates her, and then after the earl dies, she essentially makes Sophie be like a servant in their house, but she does manage to sneak out one single night to attend a masquerade ball at the Bridgertons, where she meets Benedict. Then we have the fourth book, which is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is Colin Bridgerton's story, and it follows him and Penelope, who is a family friend, as they gradually realize their feelings for each other. And then at the same time, throughout all of these Bridgerton books, there's a gossip page called Lady Whistledown. And in this book, one wealthy benefactor says that she will give anyone £1,000 if they find out who Lady Whistledown is. So the search for Lady Whistledown begins in this book. And then we have number 5, To Serve Philli with Love. I hated this one. Spoiler alert if you want to watch the video. This book is Eloise's story. So essentially, at the beginning of the book, you find out that Eloise has been writing this man Philip letters for a while now. And in his latest letter, he mentions that he's interested in marrying Eloise and asks if she would like to come visit him for a little while so they can see if they're compatible. So she does that, but she doesn't tell him she's coming. She doesn't tell her family she's coming. She just gets up and leaves one day. And trouble ensues from there. Then we have When He Was Wicked. This is book 6. This is Francesca's story. At the beginning of the book, Francesca is married, but then her husband dies. And you find out that her husband's best friend has been desperately in love with Francesca ever since he first saw her. Next is It's in His Kiss. This is Hyacinth's story. It follows her and a man named Gareth, whose father hates him. But at the beginning of the book, Gareth finds an old family diary, which is written entirely in Italian. He finds out that Hyacinth can read Italian, so he gives it to her to translate. And from there, they find out that there are diamonds hidden in his father's house. And then they go on like an adventure to try to get them. Then finally, the last Bridgerton book is On the Way to the Wedding. This is Gregory's story. So the very first chapter of this book, Gregory is bursting into a church and there's a wedding going on, and he's begging the intended bride not to marry her intended groom, and things proceed from there. That's all the Bridgerton books. If you want to know my thoughts and reactions, please watch the video when it comes out. I think it's a fun one personally, but I'm a little bit biased. After that, I finished a book that I had DNF'd a very long time ago, and that is Consider the Lobster and Other Stories by David Foster Wallace. This is a collection of essays about everything from like a porn convention to boiling lobsters in water to following John McCain's campaign. I really think that Wallace had a gift for making really like mundane things sound very interesting, because those 3 things don't sound interesting to read about like at all, except for John McCain's campaign, but that's just because I'm politically minded. I don't think that's interesting to most people, but he did make the essays interesting. That said, there are definitely some essays in here that I thought were kind of boring and I wasn't into, specifically like the porn one I thought was boring. And for the most part, I like his style of writing, which if you don't know includes like a million different footnotes that you constantly have to like go back and forth from the footnotes to the main text. I liked it for the most part, but sometimes it was just really annoying because I just wanted to read the main text and I didn't want to keep getting interrupted by the footnotes. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Overall, I liked it, but I didn't really like it. Then after that, I read King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This is a spin-off series in the Grishaverse. So it's like, if you've heard of Shadow and Bone and that original trilogy, there's that trilogy, then there's the Crooked Kingdom trilogy, then there's this duology. So this book follows our main character Nikolai, who is the king of, God, what's the place called? It starts with an R. Ravka. So Nikolai is the king of Ravka. But what his constituents or people don't know is that while the Dark King was in power, he like tortured Nikolai and left a part of his darkness inside of him. So at night, sometimes he becomes like this demon figure that then others around him have to figure out how to subdue. So he's grappling with that. You're also following other characters like Zoya, Nina, all these characters from their original or other books. I gave this book 3.5 stars. YA isn't really my thing anymore, but I do really like the Grishaverse, so I did want to read this. It's been a while since I've read any of the books, so I had like no memory of a lot of the stuff that happened. Like I did not remember Nikolai being affected by the Darkling at all, but it did still feel nice to be back in the world with a bunch of characters that I'm familiar with. And Nikolai in particular particular was one of my favorite characters from the original trilogy, so it was nice to like be in his head and have a story focusing on him. All in all, I think this is a pretty solid YA fantasy. I'm surprised I don't really hear much more about it, but whatever, I liked it. And after that, I immediately picked up Rule of Woles, which is the second and final book in the duology. This book I also gave 3.5 stars. I thought this was a really solid end to like a fun and memorable series. This book is huge, and I read it in like a day, so I really feel like that's saying something, especially because I'm supposed to be studying for the bar right now. I did put off my studying for this book, which is so bad. But even though I really liked this duology as a whole, I do kind of agree with some other reviewers who were saying that they didn't feel like the duology felt necessary for the whole Grishaverse. It does kind of feel like fan service because you're going back to these characters and you have main characters like Alina and Kaz Brecker making appearances, but I am a fan, so I did enjoy it. And lastly, I have 4 books that I read for another video, which will probably not be out until August. So again, I'm not going to tell you my rating or my thoughts, I'm just going to describe the books for you. The first of which is Against the Loveless World by Susan Abu-Hawa. This book follows a Palestinian prisoner who's being held in an Israeli confinement cell. It takes place during 2 different timelines. So one is while she's in the cell, which she calls the Cube, and her life imprisoned. And the second timeline is her life before all of this happened, her growing up in Kuwait, being forced into prostitution, being raped, and then slowly her story of joining the Palestinian resistance movement. After that, I read Evil Eye by Tef Ram. This book follows our main character Yara, who is a child of Palestinian immigrants. This also takes place in 2 different timelines. It follows her childhood growing up, which was very, very rough. But it also follows her in the present day when she is married with 2 children, and she's just really struggling against the patriarchy and against racism, and she just is trying to figure out who she wants to be. After that, I read Shell Shock, On the Ground Under Israel's Gaza Assault by Mohammed Omer. This is a non-fiction book that talks about Israel's 2014 attack on Gaza. It's told through the perspective of a local journalist who lived through it. And each it's not like told in a narrative format. Each chapter is very short and it's kind of reads like a little journalism essay or whatever, little article. That's the word, article. Then I picked up Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Musab Abu Toha. And this is a collection of poetry from someone living in Gaza. And then the very last book I read this month is Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. And this book also takes place in 2 timelines. One is shortly after the Nakba, and it follows a Palestinian woman who is found by Israeli soldiers and is then raped and attacked and later killed. And then it follows someone in the present day who finds out about the story and then becomes like obsessed with trying to research it herself. So there you go. Overall, I had a very solid reading month and I really enjoyed myself. And I read a lot of books, which is just crazy. That did mean that my studying suffered as a result, which sucks, but we're just going to pretend everything is fine. Let me know what books you read or enjoyed this month down below, and I'll see you soon with another video. Goodbye.